The river was never supposed to sound like that. At dawn, Maplewood woke to a roar that didn't belong. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't wind. It was water, angry and fast, tearing at the edges of a town that had trusted it for generations. By the time the first emergency alert buzzed phones across the county, the river had already climbed the banks, swallowing grass, paths, and promises. Ethan Miller stood at his kitchen sink, staring out the window as rain slammed the glass. His coffee sat untouched. The light outside was flat and gray, the kind that made everything feel unfinished. He had lived in Maplewood all his life. He knew storms. This one felt different. The air itself seemed tight, like it was waiting for something to break. His phone buzzed again. Another alert. Evacuation routes. Shelter locations. He set the phone down, heart ticking faster than the clock on the wall. Ethan wasn't afraid of storms. He was afraid of what storms changed. He grabbed his jacket and keys, then stopped. On the counter lay an old photo he'd found the night before while cleaning. It showed a younger Ethan standing knee-deep in the river. Fishing pole crooked, laughing as Grandpa Henry watched from the bank. The river in the picture was calm, almost shy. Ethan turned the photo face down. The radio crackled to life on its own, or so it seemed. Flash flood warning, the voice said. Residents near the river should prepare to leave immediately. Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't an alert. Ethan, Grandpa Henry said when he answered. The old man's voice was steady but thin, like it had traveled a long way. The water's closer than I've ever seen it. Ethan didn't ask questions. He didn't say he'd be right there. He just moved. Jacket on, keys in hand. Door open. Rain slapped his face as he ran to the truck. The drive to Grandpa's house usually took 10 minutes. That morning it took twice as long. Streets were already slick. Water pooled at intersections. A trash can floated past a stop sign like it had given up. People stood on porches, staring at the sky, making calls, deciding what to save. Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. 2 years ago, he had lost his fiancée in a way that had ripped the world clean in half. Since then, he had learned how to move fast and feel little. Fix the problem. Keep going. Don't stop long enough to remember. He turned onto Riverbend Road and felt his stomach drop. The river had jumped the bank. Brown water pushed across lawns, creeping toward steps and doors. The sound was louder here, a deep, rushing growl. Grandpa Henry's house sat low, closer to the water than any other. It was old, sturdy, and stubborn, much like the man who lived inside. Ethan parked as close as he could and ran the rest of the way. "Grandpa," he shouted, pushing the door open. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and old wood. Grandpa Henry sat in his armchair by the window, hat on his knee, suitcase at his feet. He looked up and smiled like this was a normal visit. "Morning, kid," he said. "You brought the rain with you." Ethan laughed once, sharp and nervous. "We need to go now." "No," Grandpa said. "I wanted to see how close it would get." Ethan glanced at the window. Water lapped at the porch steps. "This isn't a lesson," he said. "This is danger." Grandpa rose slowly, joints stiff but spirit calm. "Everything dangerous teaches something," he said, "if you pay attention." They moved fast. Ethan grabbed the suitcase. Grandpa took one last look around the room, his eyes soft but not sad. When they stepped outside, the rain had eased, but the river had not. It rushed past the house, carrying branches, pieces of fences, someone's cooler. They made it to the truck just as a siren wailed down the road. Ethan helped Grandpa in and drove toward higher ground, water slapping the tires. He didn't look back. The shelter was set up at the high school gym. Cars lined the lot. People hurried inside with bags, pets, kids wrapped in blankets. Volunteers pointed and smiled and tried to sound calm. The air inside buzzed with fear and relief mixed together. Ethan found 2 cots near the wall. Grandpa sat down with a sigh and patted the mattress. "Still standing?" he said. Ethan nodded, though his chest felt tight. He watched a woman clutch a framed photo. A man argued quietly into his phone. A kid stared at the ceiling, eyes wide. The gym lights hummed. The rain hammered the roof. Ethan sat on his cot and finally let himself breathe. "You okay?" Grandpa asked. Ethan shrugged. "I'm used to fixing things. This feels bigger." Grandpa studied him. "You've always wanted control." Ethan didn't answer. Control had felt like safety after loss. Control had felt like survival. Hours passed. The rain slowed. The river kept rising. Volunteers brought soup. A local radio station played soft music. People spoke in low voices, like loud sounds might make things worse. Ethan checked his phone. Photos from neighbors showed streets underwater. Cars stalled. A small bridge gone. His heart pounded with each update. Grandpa leaned closer. "When I was your age," he said, "I lost more than a house once." Ethan looked at him. "You never told me." "There wasn't time then," Grandpa said. "And later, there didn't seem to be a reason." "What happened?" Ethan asked. Grandpa smiled faintly. "I learned that holding on too tight can pull you under." The words landed heavier than Ethan expected. He thought of the life he'd built after his loss. Clean, quiet, careful, empty. The storm finally broke near midnight. The rain stopped, like someone had turned off a switch. The river stayed loud, but the air felt lighter. People slept in fits and starts. Ethan didn't sleep at all. At dawn, officials announced the water had crested. Damaged teams would go out soon. Relief rippled through the gym, followed by worry. What would they find? Ethan helped Grandpa stand. They walked outside into cool air and pale light. The town looked bruised. Mud-coated sidewalks. Debris piled in corners. The river had pulled back just enough to show what it had taken. Ethan felt a strange mix of loss and awe. The world had changed in one night. It would never be exactly the same. They returned to the shelter to wait for clearance. As they walked in, Ethan noticed a woman handing out coffee near the door. She moved quickly, smiling at everyone, her sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back. There was something steady about her, something kind. She handed Ethan a cup. "You look like you could use this," she said. "Thanks," he replied, surprised by how warm the cup felt in his hands. She nodded and moved on, already helping someone else. Ethan watched her go, then turned to Grandpa. "This town," he said, "it's different now." Grandpa's eyes followed the volunteers, the neighbors talking, the quiet work beginning. "It always was," he said. "You're just seeing it." Ethan took a sip of coffee and felt something loosen inside his chest. The flood had taken roads and lawns and peace of mind. But it had also stripped away the quiet walls he'd built around himself. He didn't know what would come next. He only knew the river had started something he couldn't ignore. And this was only the beginning. The sun broke through clouds like it had been waiting for a chance, turning Maplewood into a patchwork of wet streets, mud, and golden light. The river had fallen, leaving behind a strange silence, a quiet that felt heavier than the roar of the night before. People walked carefully, stepping over debris, calling out to neighbors, checking on pets, shaking hands with strangers they had only just met. Life was returning, but nothing was the same. Ethan Miller stepped out of the shelter into the morning air, coffee still warm in his hands. He looked at the town he thought he knew. Fences were broken, lawns gone, roads patched with mud. A small tree had fallen across the main street, and cars were backed up in both directions. The river had taken much, but it had left something behind: neighbors helping neighbors, strangers becoming friends, a shared understanding that life was fragile and unpredictable. He walked beside Grandpa Henry, whose old boots squelched in the mud. "It's worse than I thought," Ethan said, shaking his head at the damage. "People lost a lot last night." Grandpa Henry nodded, eyes scanning the horizon. "Yes, but they'll rebuild. They always do. And sometimes rebuilding shows you what really matters." Ethan paused, staring at a house that had lost half its roof. He thought about the life he had been keeping quiet, the solitude that had wrapped around him like armor. For the first time since his fiancée died, he felt that armor cracking. He realized how much he had avoided people, avoided feeling. And now, with the river behind them, He felt the pull of something new. Volunteers had already started organizing relief efforts. Ethan noticed a woman moving quickly through the crowd, handing out blankets and hot coffee, her hands steady despite the chaos. She smiled at him briefly as he passed. Something about her caught his attention: warmth, competence, a spark that seemed rare in the aftermath of disaster. Her name tag read Claire, but she didn't linger for introductions. She moved on, helping the next person with the same energy. Ethan walked to the gym where the community had gathered supplies. People were sorting clothes, food, and toys. Children laughed despite the mud, finding small joy in paper boats and puddles. Ethan helped a man carry a box of blankets, feeling muscles he hadn't realized he had been ignoring. Every step, every interaction reminded him that life continued even when it broke apart. He paused and looked back at Grandpa, who was chatting quietly with an elderly neighbor. Grandpa's voice was soft, patient, but Ethan could see the pride in his eyes. The old man had lived through storms, floods, losses, and yet here he was, calm and steady in the chaos. Grandpa Henry had always been a rock in Ethan's life, teaching him patience and resilience even when lessons were hard. Later that morning, Ethan returned to the gym, grabbing another coffee from the makeshift table. Claire was there again, handing out hot drinks with her warm smile. This time, she stopped for a moment. "You've been helping a lot," she said, her voice friendly but carrying a quiet strength. "You live around here." "Yeah," Ethan replied. "I grew up here." "Grew up near the river, actually," Claire nodded. "The river can be beautiful and dangerous." He smiled faintly. "Tell me about it." They worked side by side for hours, organizing donations, moving boxes, and checking on families. With every shared task, conversation flowed more naturally. Ethan realized he hadn't spoken to someone in months without the weight of caution pressing down on him. Here, in the middle of a flood's aftermath, he found ease. He found laughter again. He found connection. By mid-afternoon, volunteers were organizing teams to clear debris from streets. Ethan joined one group, carrying branches and broken boards, stepping carefully over puddles and mud. He noticed Claire moving from group to group, encouraging everyone, solving problems quietly and efficiently. There was something magnetic about her, energy-focused but warm, strong yet approachable. As they paused for water, Claire turned to him. "You've been quiet today," she said, a teasing edge in her tone. "Are you always this calm in a crisis?" Ethan laughed, a real laugh this time, and shook his head. "Not always. I guess I needed something to keep me busy today." "You've done more than most," she said softly, "and you're still helping. That says a lot." Her words struck him in a way he didn't expect. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not just noticed, but truly seen. And that feeling was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. As evening approached, the floodwaters had fully receded. Streets were passable again, though muddy. People were returning to their homes cautiously, assessing the damage, beginning the slow work of cleaning and repairing. Ethan walked through the streets with Grandpa, carrying small items back to houses that could still be salvaged. "Ethan," Grandpa said quietly, stopping to look at the sunset reflecting on wet rooftops. "Do you see it?" "See what?" Ethan asked, tired but alert. "The hope," Grandpa said. "Even after everything, there's hope. People are helping each other. Life is still here." Ethan looked around. He saw neighbors sharing tools, strangers offering food, families embracing after checking their homes. He saw Claire helping a child find a lost toy in the mud, smiling gently. He realized Grandpa was right. The flood had taken many things, but it had also revealed something essential. People could rebuild. And sometimes what was rebuilt was stronger than what was lost. Later that evening, Ethan returned to the shelter for the night. People were settling down, quiet conversations filling the air. He sat beside Grandpa, who had a small smile on his face, watching the community come together. "You learned something today," Grandpa said, voice low but warm. Ethan nodded. "I think so. That life doesn't stop when things break. And we can't just protect ourselves from pain. We have to take the risk to live fully." Grandpa patted his hand. "Exactly. Sometimes it's the floods that teach us the most important lessons. Ethan thought about Claire, her smile, her kindness, her steady presence in chaos. He thought about the connections he had avoided for years, the walls he had built around himself, and the fear he had carried after loss. For the first time, he felt ready to let some of it go. The next morning, Maplewood was alive with work. Volunteers and residents cleared streets, repaired fences, and carried boxes. Ethan and Claire moved together, a natural rhythm forming as they worked. Words weren't always necessary. Sometimes a shared glance or a gentle hand on a shoulder said everything. By mid-morning, Ethan stopped for a break, leaning against a fence, mud on his boots and hands. Claire joined him, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one. "You did good yesterday," she said, smiling. "And today, too. You didn't just survive the flood. You helped others survive it, too." Ethan looked at her, the warmth in her eyes undeniable. I finally feel like I'm part of something again. Like I'm not just surviving, I'm living." She nodded, understanding more than he could say. Sometimes it takes a disaster to make us notice what really matters. Ethan thought of Grandpa Henry's words. Bridges instead of walls. Risk instead of fear. Connection instead of isolation. And he realized that for the first time in years, he wanted to take that chance. As the sun climbed higher, Ethan and Claire returned to the cleanup work. Their conversation flowed naturally now, laughter mixing with the sounds of shovels, hammers, and the quiet buzz of determination. People passed by, exchanging smiles and thanks. There was energy in the air, a mix of relief and determination, a sense that life had been tested and had survived. By evening, the streets were passable again. The river was calm, almost apologetic. Ethan walked with Grandpa along the bank, looking at the water reflecting the colors of the sunset. "Do you see it?" Grandpa asked again. Ethan nodded. "I see it. Life goes on, and sometimes it gives you a second chance to really live it." Grandpa smiled, squeezing his hand. "And sometimes it gives you someone to share it with." Ethan thought of Claire, her smile, the way she had been there in the storm and after. The realization hit him like a gentle wave. Not urgent, not loud, but undeniable. He wanted to see where this could go. He wanted to take that chance. As night fell, Maplewood settled into quiet again. The flood was over. Roads and houses bore the marks of what had happened, but hearts were mending. Ethan sat by the window of his grandparents' home, looking at the river that had once seemed dangerous, now calm and reflecting the moonlight. He realized the flood hadn't just changed the town. It had changed him. The walls he had built around himself were still there, but cracks had formed. Light, hope, and maybe even love could slip through. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't fear it. The river had taught him a lesson Grandpa had tried to give him for years. Life is unpredictable. Love is worth the risk. And sometimes the hardest storms bring the brightest beginnings. Ethan looked at the calm water and smiled. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Cleaning, rebuilding, living. But for now, he felt a quiet joy, a gentle hope, and a spark of connection that he hadn't felt in years. Something new was starting in Maplewood, and he was ready to see where it could go. The flood had taken much, but it had given more hope, resilience, community, and the possibility of love. Ethan didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, he felt ready to live fully, to open his heart, and to take that first step toward something that felt worth the risk. And somewhere across the muddy streets and the quiet,